Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I have another lesson ready for y'all today. So we've been talking about some complicated stuff, cellular respiration, ATP, photosynthesis. Today we're going to really dive into the nitty-gritty of cellular respiration and figure out how does your cells really extract all of the energy it can out of the food that you're eating. We're really going to focus on these three steps of cellular respiration. They're on the board here. We're going to focus on glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electric transport chain. These are the steps that your body uses to take glucose and break it down into ATP that your cells can use. So let's go ahead and get into it and see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay, so here are some key ideas behind cellular respiration that I would like for you to keep in mind. So remember that organic sugar or glucose is converted into inorganic gas, carbon dioxide. You're going to take in food, you're going to take in that glucose through your diet, and then as you break it down into ATP, you're going to exhale. And what are you exhaling? You're going to exhale carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct of cellular respiration. What we're really trying to make here is ATP. ATP is what we want, because that is the energy that your cells use and is produced in this process of cellular respiration. Remember that cellular respiration mostly takes place in the mitochondria of cells. It does happen in the cytoplasm a little bit though, and we'll get into that in just a moment. And this occurs constantly, 24/7, whether you've just eaten or you haven't eaten, it's the middle of the night, your body's always going through this process. Your cells are working even if you're asleep, and so they're always doing these steps of cellular respiration so that they can get as much out of the food that you're eating. So here's an overview of cellular respiration. Let's look at the overall equation. Okay, so glucose, the food that you eat, plus oxygen, the air that you breathe, when they come together in your cells and your cells do cellular respiration, it's going to convert it into carbon dioxide, which is the gas that you exhale, water, and ATP, which is the energy that we need. The purpose of this is to produce ATP. That is our goal, okay? We really need the ATP here so that you can stay alive. There's two ways to break down food. This is a review of last time. You can either do anaerobic respiration, which is when your cells don't have any oxygen. Sometimes you'll see this called fermentation. There's alcoholic fermentation, there's lactic acid fermentation, but they're both very similar. Or the next bullet point, we can do something called aerobic respiration. This is what your cells will do if there is oxygen. This is often referred to cellular respiration, and this is what we really want to do. This is how we make the most ATP out of the food that you're eating. Okay? The first process for either one, if you're doing anaerobic, if you're doing aerobic, you always start off with glycolysis. That's our starting point, okay? And that's what we'll get started with first. Okay, so here is the equation for cellular respiration. Again, you are going to need to be able to write this down, okay? So C6H12O6, that is glucose plus oxygen is going to yield, through using some enzymes and stuff, is going to yield carbon dioxide, water, and energy. What I do want us to know, notice that the two things on the left of the equation are called reactants. Reactants are things that go into an equation, and then the three things on the right, carbon dioxide, water, and energy, those are the products, okay? And that energy is specifically in the form of ATP. Okay, so let's talk about glycolysis first. Remember that this is the first thing that happens. If you have oxygen or you don't have oxygen, you always do glycolysis first. Well, let's just look at the word glycolysis, and it's really going to help you figure out what's going on here. Lysis means to split, and glyco is talking about glucose. So what are we doing in glycolysis? We're going to try to split glucose. It's always the first thing that we're doing. So glycolysis is, its job is to split the glucose apart. Glucose has 6 carbons in it, and when we split it apart, we're going to make pyruvic acid, and each of those pyruvic acids are 3 carbons large. So 3 and 3 together make 6, which is the full glucose molecule. Okay, so kind of a breakdown of that. Glycolysis is the process in which one molecule of glucose is split in half. It produces 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound. It occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. So remember that glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. The other stuff, the Krebs cycle, the ETC, that's in the mitochondria, but right now we're in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, so what happens after that? Okay, so the next step after glycolysis depends on if we have oxygen or not. If oxygen is not present, we do anaerobic respiration. And that means we're going to have to do some sort of fermentation. In our cells, we'll do lactic acid fermentation, and in plants and yeast, they'll do something called alcoholic fermentation. Anaerobic means without oxygen, and fermentation is a type of anaerobic respiration. If we do have oxygen, though, we're going to do a type of cellular respiration called aerobic respiration. Okay? This involves two steps, the Krebs cycle and the ETC. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. And aerobic means there is oxygen, and that's going to yield a lot more ATP as if we have oxygen to go along with it. So, aerobic respiration. So this is after we've done the glycolysis. We're moving into the mitochondria. That's where most of the ATP is made. The purpose here is that this is the process that cells use to extract the maximum energy from food molecules. Okay, we need oxygen to do this, and here is the balanced equation. Again, it's oxygen plus glucose yields carbon dioxide and water and ATP. Okay, two processes are happening here, the Krebs cycle and the electric transport chain, the ETC. So let's talk about the Krebs cycle a little bit here. Okay, so again, this is happening in the mitochondria. Okay, what the process here is that we're going to take the pyruvic acid. Remember that in glycolysis, we made two pyruvic acids. We're going to take that pyruvic acid and we're going to break it down a little bit further. We're going to break it into acetyl coenzyme A. Okay, then that's going to produce carbon dioxide. That CO2 is produced, and that's expelled through the cell, and eventually you will exhale it. Okay, then we have these electric carriers are produced. That's FADH and NADH. I know these molecules kind of have weird names to them, but just hold on. I'll try to explain them in a little bit more detail. And then a net, through the Krebs cycle, a net of 2 ATP is formed. 1 ATP from each pyruvic acid from glycolysis. All right, so just to talk about the acetyl coenzyme A and the FADH2 and the NADH, I'm going to give y'all an analogy, and I kind of want you to imagine this for me, if you will. Okay, so imagine your parents take you to takes you to an arcade. You're going to an arcade. Maybe you're going to Dave & Buster's or anything like that. You're going to an arcade, right? Well, most of those arcade games don't just take money. So when you're going to an arcade, you're going to take that $5 bill, you're going to break it into tokens that you can play the games with, and then once you play the game, you're going to get tickets out of it, right? You're really trying to get tickets so that you can buy a prize. So the whole process here is you have money, you turn the money into tokens, you play the games with the tokens, and then you're trying to get tickets. Does that kind of sound familiar to you? So that's very similar to what's happening in this cellular respiration. We're starting off with glucose. That's like the money that your parents give you, okay? Well then, we want ATP at the end of the process, but we can't go straight from money to ATP. So what we're gonna do is we take that $5 bill, we cash it into tokens. The tokens here are the acetyl coenzyme A and the FADH and the NADH. We need these molecules to make these mechanisms work. So that's like taking your money and turning it into tokens. So now you can play the arcade games. Now we can run some of these systems. Okay? After you play the arcade games, you're going to get tickets, and the tickets are what you really want. Very similar with cellular respiration, our ultimate goal here is to make ATP, but we can't go straight from glucose to ATP. We have to get these tokens involved, the acetyl coenzyme A and the FADH2 and the NADH. So kind of just use that analogy as we're moving forward here. We kind of need to break it into something smaller so that we can run the mechanism so that then we can make ATP at the end of the day, okay? So let's go through the Krebs cycle in a little bit more detail. I know the text is kind of small here, so just make sure you're paying attention the best you can, and I'll kind of go through this with you real quickly here. Okay, so for the Krebs cycle, when oxygen is present, such as in muscles, step 2 in cellular respiration is the Krebs cycle. This is happening in the mitochondria. Okay, we're going to use pyruvic acid that we made in glycolysis. Is going to be modified in a series of reactions. Okay, these reactions produce high energy electron carriers that can be used in the electric transport chain. NAD plus and FAD plus are the high energy electron carriers. H plus is the electron that needs to be carried. Okay, so the NAD plus and the FAD plus turn into NADH and FADH2 when carrying electrons, providing energy to drive the electric transport chain. 2 molecules of ATP are generated per glucose, and CO2 is produced and released. Okay, so here's kind of what's happening in the Krebs cycle. We use that pyruvic acid from the glucose, we modify it, and then we need these high electron transport carriers. And we're going to turn NAD plus and FAD plus into NADH and FADH. Okay, I know this stuff is complicated, so just hang in there with me. Okay, so then that leads us to the last part of cellular respiration, which is called the electric transport chain. The reason it's called the electric transport chain is that we're moving electrons around in order to generate enough energy to make the ATP. This happens in the mitochondria, specifically in the folds of the mitochondria, which are called cristae. It's like the inner membrane. Okay, so we use the electron carriers, the NADH and the FADH2. This releases their high energy electrons to carrier membrane proteins. Okay, the hydrogen ions move through the ATP synthase channel, and that's going to generate ATP. Oxygen serves as the final electron acceptor in the chain, combining with the H ions to form water. Okay, and our net total here is 32 ATP. So just look at this bullet point right here where it says H ions move through the ATP synthase channel to generate ATP. This is what I was talking about, like when you go to the arcade and you're using the tokens to play the games to get tickets at the end, right? So that whole process is money to tokens. You use the tokens to play the game, and then the game gives you tickets, right? You want tickets at the end of the day. Something similar is going on here, okay? So we started off with glucose. That's the food that you eat, okay? We're going to turn that glucose into these molecules, the pyruvic acid and the NADH and the FADH2. So we're turning glucose into these tokens. Once we have the tokens, we can play this game. This game is called ATP synthase channel. What happens here is when we run these molecules through this transport channel, the ATP synthase channel can then make ATP. And that's what we really want. It's giving us ATP when we put these in. It's very similar to when you put in a token, you play a game, and then you get a ticket out. Okay? So that's kind of, to me, that's how I kind of think about all of this. Hopefully that's helpful to y'all as well. Okay, so that's a breakdown of the electric transport chain. Okay, let's just look at it in a little bit more detail before we move on. So the electric transport chain, remember that this only happens if we have oxygen. Okay, it happens in the mitochondria. Okay, we use those tokens that we made, the NADH and the FADH, we use those, they act as high energy carriers, and they drop off their energy at that ATP synthase channel. Okay, the oxygen bonds with 2 hydrogen atoms. Those are the final electron acceptor to form water. So the byproduct of this whole reaction is water. And 32 molecules of ATP are going to be produced per glucose. So this is where most of the ATP is coming from. Those other 2 steps were just, we were leading up to this. We needed to get our tokens and all of that so that when we get to the electric transport chain, we can play the game and make the ATP, okay? Here's kind of another breakdown of it. Let's look at this picture in a little bit of detail, and hopefully this will make sense. So our starting point is always glucose. The first step of cellular respiration is glycolysis. This is happening in the cytoplasm. When we do glycolysis, we take glucose and we split it in half, we make 2 pyruvic acids. Okay, this is also going to release a little bit of energy. If we have oxygen, we take the top route. If we do not have oxygen, we take the bottom route. So So let's do the bottom route first. We don't have any oxygen, so we're going to go into, there's two options. You're going to do fermentation. This is also in the cytoplasm. We're doing fermentation. There's two types of fermentation. Plants and yeast will do alcoholic fermentation, and bacteria and humans will do lactic acid fermentation. The lactic acid is what makes your muscles feel tired. Okay, so let's say we do have oxygen. We're going to take that top route instead. So we've done the glycolysis, we've made our pyruvic acid, we made ATP. We're going to move into the Krebs cycle. We're going to use that pyruvic acid. We're going to use that to make ATP. It's also going to give off a little bit of carbon dioxide, and we're going to make a little bit of energy here as well. Then we move into the electric transport chain. We use the pyruvic acids and the FADH+ and the NAD+. We're going to use those to play the electric transport. That's going to generate a lot of ATP. It's also going to produce a little bit of water, and it consumes a little bit of oxygen. Okay, so that's a couple of different pathways that your cells may use to do cellular respiration. Okay, so let's add it all up. What's the grand finale here? Okay, let's add everything up. So for aerobic respiration, yields only 4 molecules of ATP per 1 molecule of glucose. This is anaerobic, so we only get 4 molecules of ATP per 1 molecule. That's really not that much, right? Just 4 molecules of ATP. Let's compare that to aerobic respiration. So in aerobic respiration, we get 2 net ATP from glycolysis, we get 2 ATP from the Krebs cycle, and then we get 32 ATP from the electric transport chain. So that's a total of 36 ATP for every glucose molecule that we make. Okay, so what I want you to see here is 36 for aerobic and just 4 for anaerobic. So aerobic respiration is much, much more efficient. We just need that oxygen to make it a little bit more efficient. Okay, here's the net reaction again. We got glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. Okay, y'all, great job. I have a little review sheet I want to do with y'all. So if y'all can, teacher, go ahead and pass that sheet out. Y'all take 5 or 10 minutes, see what y'all can come up with. And then when you want a little bit of help, just come back to me. I'll review it on the board with y'all, and that way we're all on the same page. So go ahead and get those passed out, pause the video, and then when y'all are ready, come on back. All right, I know that didn't give y'all any trouble at all, but just in case there's 1 or 2 of y'all that are a little confused, I'm going to go over it with y'all up here, and then that way we're all on the same page. So let's see what y'all came up with here. The first part, we've got 10 vocabulary terms. We're going to try to match the terms with the definition here. So let's see what we got. All right, so the first one says, also referred to as the Krebs cycle. So one of these at the bottom kind of has 2 names. One is the Krebs cycle. What's the other name? Well, the Krebs cycle is sometimes called the citric acid cycle. So I'm going to go with letter A for that one. All right, let's do the next one. Energy-rich molecule produced during the Krebs cycle. So which of these do we make in the Krebs cycle? This is C. That FADH2, that's like one of the tokens that we need in order to play the game. Okay, let's keep it going. Number 3, where glycolysis takes place in the cell. So where does glycolysis happen? Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Okay, next one, number 4, respiration occurring without oxygen. So what do you call it when it does not need any oxygen? That's anaerobic. So letter G for that one. Good job. All right, 5, the byproduct of anaerobic respiration in animals. So why do you start to feel sore if you're working out too much? It's because your muscles are being filled up with this lactic acid. So letter J for that one. All right, let's keep it going. 6, the second phase of cellular respiration. So remember that we always start with glycolysis, but what's the second phase called? That's going to be D, the Krebs cycle. And remember, the Krebs cycle is in the mitochondria. Okay? Number 7, intermembrane structures of mitochondria that are folded. So this is where the Let's go with letter H, the cristae. This is where the ETC, the electric transport chain, happens here, okay, inside the mitochondria. Number 8, the process of breaking down glucose. What do we call breaking down glucose? That's called glycolysis, right? To split glucose is called glycolysis. Great job. Let's keep it going. Number 9, respiration that takes place with the presence of oxygen. So what is it called if we're using oxygen? That's called aerobic respiration. All right, and then the last one here, the product of glycolysis. So through glycolysis, we are making ATP. We're going to make a different molecule, though, as well, and that's called pyruvate. All right, y'all, great job. There's the top 10. I think there's five more at the bottom. Take a moment, make sure you got all those copied down, and then I'll scroll down here in just a second. We'll knock the last couple out. All right, so here's 11 through 15 at the bottom. These are true or false statements, so we're either going to use a T or an F here. All right, number 11, fermentation is the process of producing ATP when oxygen is present. So is this true or false? This is going to be false because we only do fermentation when there is no oxygen present. And this says when oxygen is present, so that's false. All right, 12. Most organisms utilize glucose to generate ATP from oxygen. Okay, this one's kind of tricky. I'm going to put false here because the words are kind of in the wrong order. It should read, most organisms utilize oxygen to generate ATP from glucose. So it's kind of in the wrong order there. But I think true or false could work for 12, okay. So let's go to 13 then, the next one. 13 says, there are 3 types of respiration, anaerobic, aerobic, and cellular. This is false. I would say there's only 2 types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic. Okay, so that's false. Okay, let's check 14. Certain organisms are capable of both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. That's true. Humans and most animals can certainly do both. We will always do aerobic when there's oxygen and anaerobic when there's not oxygen, so we can do either one. All right, and then the last one, 15. Alcoholic fermentation is responsible for muscle soreness and strenuous exercise. So this is false. It's not alcoholic fermentation, it's lactic acid fermentation that makes your muscles sore. So y'all, great work on that. I know this stuff is tricky, so I wanted to make sure I reviewed it with you a little bit. Your teacher has some more practice for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.